New things are now taking the media headline, and as a consequence of that, it is fair to say that in the digital age, protest is dead. All that has come out from this is that we realize how many of these people are brainwashed into an ideology that turns them feral. Now, Malcolm Turnbull is the king of the hill at the moment, or at least he is in his own mind when it comes to spitting venom at his own party. Calling it housing affordability simply just makes stupid people pretend as though, oh, we're doing a good thing here. It's like I've said before, it's basically just a shit sandwich. G'day, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to look at some more of the fallout that is happening in the Liberal Party, some of the reactions from ex-Liberal Party leaders, new polling that is suggesting that Pauline Hanson is making moves with specific groups in the country, and we're also going to take a look at the CFMEU, its progress and its work down in Victoria, and the fraud scandal that is breaking as we speak. We'll get into all that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Before we get into our main topics for today, we're going to take a look back at some of the new footage that has come out and the reactions and the evidence from the protests that occurred in Sydney specifically over the course of this week. Now, we saw new footage that came out from Tuesday where many of the protesters who were involved in the initial Sydney rally then took their case to Surrey Hills Police Station where they protested the police and their conduct. We've seen Greens senators specifically take to the floor and take to the media and lambast the police officers for their conduct. And yet it seems that almost no one is actually taking legal action against the police. We've seen the footage now of the police officer with his finger bloodied as a consequence of the fact that what we now know is that a 15-year-old boy at this protest biting into the hand of the police officer. I don't foresee any court cases coming out of this. From every report, it seems as though 10 people were arrested and charged, with 25 being detained from the protests. And much like all things, the protest has fizzled out. The conversation has fizzled out. New things are now taking the media headline, and as a consequence of that, it is fair to say that in the digital age, protest is dead. The internet effectively did away with the effectiveness of protests. Now you can email, you can tweet, you can Instagram message every single one of your local representatives. The purpose of protest was always to find a uniformed voice that attacked government in a way that it could not handle. Now, with the advent of the internet, that potential already exists outside of the ability of people to go and mobilize and protest in the streets. It was far more indicative of the real feelings of the population in the past than it is today. Because in a fever dream of internet conspiracy theories and an ideological center that can be entirely created and falsely created online, now protests just seem like gang gatherings, where the dumbest in society can effectively all come together because they have been brainwashed into the brain rot culture of the internet to think that the greatest thing affecting their lives today is a conflict that is happening on the other side of the world that Australia has almost no part to play in. Now, there are obviously exceptions to every single one of these rules. But in essence, there hasn't really been a protest victory since the 1980s. Some people point to the fact that there were protests that led to the legalization of gay marriage in Australia. But realistically, the change in society's ideas happened prior to the protests ever occurring. The protests were much more an event leading into the Mardi Gras ideas than it was a protest that actually changed the hearts and minds of politicians. And so in reality, the only real protest in recent memory that you can point to is from the 1980s, which were effectively similar to the civil rights movements in America, the equalization of opportunity for Indigenous peoples inside of Australia. Now, from these protests, we have seen some very interesting things coming out. Now, there was a very, very interesting document that came out with the names of 1,000 Jews who opposed Isaac Herzog coming to Australia. It has now been proven that that was in fact listed with many, many falsified names. One of those names actually being a slur in the original actual Hebrew language. But what is very interesting is that we've now seen that one of the protesters who is seen in the video footage praying on the ground was actually the same sheikh or imam who celebrated October 7th as a day of joy, a day of celebration. And this was broken by a gentleman on X, and we'll see that footage now.
The people protesting in Sydney last night were not peace activists. Amongst them was Sheikh Ibrahim Dodon, who famously celebrated the 7th of October massacre.
Some quick reflections. I just got home from the protest. Today, what we've seen is unprecedented in our city.
Here's a reminder of what he previously said.
Smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
When you have unpeaceful people marching among you, properly marching among you, and you defend them as though they are just one of you, people who celebrate the murder, the rape, the execution of over 1,000 innocent Israelis, then you do not have a peaceful protest. When you have a former Australian of the Year celebrating, calling for an intifada on our shores, you do not have a peaceful protest. When you have thousands who defy the Supreme Court's orders and attempt to march down a street that they were not allowed to march down, you do not have a peaceful protest. And all that has come out from this is that we realize how many of these people are brainwashed into an ideology that turns them feral, that makes us realize that they ought to be separated from us in society, that somehow or another they need to be re-educated. And it's something that I've been thinking about for a while now. I always hated the litigation culture that exists in America, the defamation culture, the fact that someone says something and you will be sent to court and you'll have to fight and defend your case in order to prove that you are not defaming someone. But since our free speech rights have been really tested in this country and people have been pushing the limits, what has been interesting to see is that we do not actually have a very large defamation culture in Australia. And we ought to. I no longer dislike the American system because what the American system does is that it creates a check and balance to the people who would lie through their teeth. The people who still call what is happening in Gaza a genocide, the people who still call Isaac Herzog a war criminal, the people who would say labels in order to attempt to change the hearts and minds of people in this country, and those labels are simply an outright lie. And that, in this country, needs to change. People need to start to actually realize that their words matter, the things that they say matter, and the accusations that they throw also matter. Because the average intellect in Australia is dropping, and that is a direct consequence of the fact that our public education system sucks. But not only that, it's a consequence of the fact that so many people are being taught lies, whether it's through social media or whether it's through our political class. Because ground zero for this misinformation is Parliament. It is the Senate. Because they, unlike us, have total free speech protections. They can say whatever they want. It does not matter if it is a lie. They can simply say it. It does not matter if it is disingenuous. They can simply say it. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. While we're on the topic of political corruption, let's take a quick look at the CFMEU. Now, news is breaking right now about a newly unredacted document, a report that came out years ago, redacted, that blocked evidence of $15 billion worth of corruption inside of the Victorian government. Now, the report effectively says this: the Victorian government was held hostage by the CFMEU over the course of the last 5 to 10 years over their infrastructure projects that they promised would cost approximately $100 billion of federal taxes in order to uplift the state. But in doing so, the companies that they were paying in order to provide certain services were in fact owned by bikies, gang members, and other related criminals. Companies that never did any actual work, but that were owned by these people who the government and government personnel owed debts to. That is the effective outline of what this report now can reveal to us. Let's watch this clip, which basically indicates some of the ramifications and shows us some more detail of what we're actually looking at and how screwed the Allen government is in Victoria. Watch.
Problem, I guess, Nick, is for the Victorian public, the taxpayers. They're the ones who are now witnessing these cost blowouts, these delays in all the infrastructure projects. You know, the Victorian government has been in power now for 12 or so years. They have gone project after project. There's been cost blowout after cost blowout and delay after delay. And now we're seeing reports like this that suggest they were beholden, perhaps, to the CFMEU.
The buried stuff from these reports, the deleted chapters now revealed by us, and we're going to learn a lot more about this from a Queensland Commission of Inquiry today, make it very clear that vast sums of money were entering not just the hands of corrupt companies, etc., but the hands of bikie gangs. Now think about that. In a cost of living crisis where people are struggling to pay their bills, there are, as we speak right now, companies controlled by bikie gang figures that have earned millions upon millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, from the big bill. These are bikie figures driving Lamborghinis, making an utter mozza. This government, according to this report in Victoria, not only had a duty to know about it, but did know about it and did nothing about it.
The Premier...
That level of hatred for your own population and your own voter base must be just something that is now ingrained into the major parties in this country. Over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks, we have seen several Labor and Greens senators, MPs, coming out and effectively saying the people who are voting for Pauline Hanson are uneducated, lower class, poor, and do not know what they are doing, and they're all just racists. It reminds me very, very much of the political situation that happened in America almost exactly 10 years ago, where the deplorable statement slipped out of the lips of Hillary Clinton and she thought that it meant nothing, and then half of the country took offense because she was speaking about them. It feels as though the political climate is heading in that direction here in Australia. People often say that we are just America but 10 years behind, and that does tend to be the fact. Our political situation almost directly mimics that of America just 10 years later. I mean, you can simply look at the way that we went from people like Tony Abbott, people like John Howard, into having people like Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull. Now, Malcolm Turnbull is the king of the hill at the moment, or at least he is in his own mind when it comes to spitting venom at his own party. He had an interview where he effectively lambasted the Liberal Party for their decision to actually be a conservative party, claiming that it's a problem. It's a problem that the Liberal Party are leaning into the class of people who watch Sky News. In this interview, he effectively tries to claim that anyone who is not a centrist is not Australian. Watch.
This is the inevitable consequence for the Liberal Party of imagining that the goal of politics is to seek the approval of the Sky News audience. Now, that may well represent many of the members of their branches, but it does not represent Australia. Australia is a sensible nation. We are a balanced, we are centrists as Australians. We have an electoral system that mediates our political conflict at the centre because of compulsory voting and preferential voting. And if you run off into La La Land, which is where they've headed, then you find yourself running second to Pauline Hanson. One of the Labor ministers said to me the other day, Sky News is the best thing that has ever happened to the Labor Party. It has drawn the Libs off into this La La Land, and, which is why, it's an extraordinary thing. So no wonder that you can just, if you hear a kind of a soft purring, rubbing noise in the Parliament, it's all of the Labor members just rubbing their hands and hugging themselves with glee as they watch the catastrophe on the other side.
I do not understand how it is possible to be so blind to your own ignorance. To hear the statements that come out of your own mouth and think to yourself, yeah, that's fine, no worries. I definitely didn't say anything wrong just then. Now, everyone understands that politics is on a spectrum. Everyone understands that we are a representative democracy. And so if there is a coterie of the population who are represented by Sky News and the views that Sky News holds, aren't they someone worthy of being represented in this country? Malcolm Turnbull's basic thought process here is, if you do not align with my views, which are not in any way centrist, Malcolm Turnbull was pretty much the beginning of the end of the Liberal Party. The social left-wing ideology that destroyed the fabric of the conservative movement within the Liberals, only slightly remedied by Scott Morrison's hardline fiscal conservatism, but his also softball approach to social conservatism. And now we end up with someone like Susan Ley, who is effectively a know-nothing, do-nothing candidate. Susan Ley has held every position, both on the social front and the economic front, in her time in politics. She is a big nothing burger. I couldn't tell you what she stands for, because she effectively stands for everything, which is a serious problem when you are trying to compete in politics. And that is what happens when you are a lukewarm party, a party that attempts to be centrist. Because that is not how politics works, in fact. There is almost no one who is purely centrist on every single idea. There are people who lean conservative and there are people who lean communist. And that spectrum is far and wide. And you have to meet in the middle of the wing upon which you plan on representing. And then the pendulum of politics creates good policy where a strong opposition and a strong government can combat their ideas and then find that perfect middle. But to have a government that effectively dictates the rules by saying that it is the centrist party and that they are just towing the middle line is not only dangerous, but it is the basis of dictatorship. Because if that were the case in politics, then we would never need to have elections. Because if everyone in Australia is a centrist, then we know which party is going to win at this point, right? Because everyone's a centrist. All of the politicians who are representing us are also centrists, because that's who Australians are. But that simply isn't the case. The fact of the matter is, the Australian population is extremely fractured on its ideas. Currently, Everyone on a social level is almost always left-wing. Religion has left the page when it comes to Australia to a very large degree. Now, I don't think that is organic because they're trying to replace it with something else. They replace it with climate ideology, they replace it with sacrificing their children to Moloch through abortion, and they replace it with other deifications of material things instead of deifying God. And that also is indicated in the ever-growing suicide rate and the ever-decreasing happiness rate within our nation. But at the end of the day, what politics is there to do is to actually represent the people. And with the new polling that is coming out specifically surrounding One Nation, you can see that the population that actually works, the population that is the bedrock of our society, is fed up. In the latest polling, One Nation is tracking near 35% of the vote, above both Labor and the Liberals when it comes to the working class vote. That is unseen in Australian political history. The people who bear the brunt of the socialist agenda are sick of it. Just today, we watched Jim Chalmers sneer as he moved to the Parliament floor in order to ensure that your hard-earned dollars that you have saved, no matter how you got them, no matter if you lived on 2-minute noodles, 1 meal a day for your entire life so that you could retire with a nice nest egg, hitting a super portfolio of 3 million plus, that you would be lumped with a tax that would ensure that your wealth gets redistributed to people who do not earn as much as you, who may have earned as much as you, but decided to spend all of their money on international holidays and making sure that their bellies were full. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people who are struggling in this country, and of course there are. But the idea that in Australia, the majority of people who are struggling not because of their own decisions, but because the climate has just created this environment where they're unable to work, is ludicrous. There is always work. If there wasn't, we wouldn't have to immigrate hundreds of thousands of people into this country every year. There wouldn't be the fact that we have a skills shortage in this country. If we really had an employability issue and there were no jobs for people to actually find, we would see zero immigration until a solution to that problem was found. At the end of the day, the redistributionist workflow that exists in this country, specifically based around the tax policy, effectively means that anyone making between $100,000 and $250,000 a year bears the brunt of most of the tax burden for the people who decide that they don't want to work in this country. And that is laying itself out in our political situation right now. And I think it's going to keep going, because new data that has just released indicates that today, or at least at the end of 2025, the average household has 20 times less expendable income than the average citizen had in 2022. Let me spell that out for you, and you can see the numbers for yourself.
For 18 months, spending growth was entirely due to population growth, with per capita spending in decline. Now, that's positive at least, but population is still contributing 80% of the growth in private demand.
That effectively means that the average household, outside of necessary expenses, now has 20 times less than they would have back in 2022. That's because everything costs more, because you're spending so much money on your mortgage and your rent, because we've had Labor in politics, in government, now for the better part of 4 years. Every minute, every second, every ounce of that burden is settled squarely on their shoulders. And yet, we still have politicians like Murray Watt who have the gall to say stuff like this. Even though every one of these policies has been passed through, he still has the gall to say this. Watch.
Well, Senator Roberts, we recently passed some laws to strengthen the minister's powers to cancel visas of people promoting hate, and your party voted against those laws.
That's because of other things, Minister.
Sorry?
That's because of other things that we did not like in the bill. Would you...
But you voted against what you're asking for.
We voted against the other provisions of your bill?
Which were to make it easier to ban association with neo-Nazis. Was it that bit, or that you didn't like, or what were the...
Minister, we could talk for hours about the specifics
but the
about
problem,
your bill.
The problem for One Nation is that you
time
always...
for you to answer my questions, not for me to answer your questions.
The problem with One Nation is that you call for things to happen and then you vote against them. You've done that now on... We do not
vote against tight immigration.
You voted against same job, same pay when you
Minister, will you increase the immigration vetting
against
standards?
Cheaper medicines when you want things done for poorer Australians. Like, at some point, Australians are going to see through One Nation and see that you make promises that you don't keep when you come to Canberra. And you did it again recently by calling for hate preachers to be banned and restricted, and then voting against laws that would do that. You called for migration screening, and then you voted against it. So I'll leave it to Australians to, see through what One Nation does rather than what One Nation says.
And this is the tip of the iceberg of the statement that I made earlier, the disingenuousness in Parliament and in the Senate. When people like Murray Watt can pretend as though the bills that they put forward are simply the title of the bill, and tell everyone inside of the Australian public that One Nation doesn't vote for cheap housing, doesn't vote for strong immigration, doesn't vote because the bill says Strong Immigration Act or Lower Housing Act. These bills are hundreds of pages long, and the detail that is inside of them changes the way that we live. You don't even notice it, but it changes everything about the way that we live our normal day-to-day lives. When One Nation opposes these sorts of bills, like the Housing Affordability Act, for example, which Pauline Hanson has repeatedly voted against, it's because just calling it housing affordability, much like calling a genocide when it's not a genocide, is in fact a false label. Calling it housing affordability simply just makes stupid people pretend as though, oh, we're doing a good thing here. It's like I've said before, it's basically just a shit sandwich, okay? It's housing affordability, and in the middle, it's just garbage. There's actually no ability for this to fix housing affordability, much like we saw with the 5% deposit scheme, which has upped prices by a further 15% in the course of time that it has existed. Because when you back a loan with government funds, what happens is there's just more money in the market. And that means the free market that exists inside of the housing market is going to take advantage of that. And not only is it going to take advantage of that, it is forced to. Because when you have auctions inside of your country, that means that the highest bidder is the one who gets the price, and that sets the market value for the entire suburb. People do not understand how politics works in this country, and we are severely lacking in an education system that allows them to actually understand it. It is very interesting that in year 6 we do a visit to Canberra and we make it this big deal, but we never actually learn about how politics works in Australia, not really. We never learn about the ins and outs of what it is to actually pass a bill, what it is to draft a bill, what happens when a bill is accepted and passed through Parliament and the Senate, what are the levels of government, what are their roles, who are the people that are inside of them. We do not have a lust for this stuff, a hunger for it, a hunger to understand what it is that our government that is so infused in our day-to-day lives actually does for us or does to us. And that is to our detriment. That will do us for the show today. My name is Mark Pirotta, and this is the Mark Pirotta Show. God bless.